Net neutrality is a concept aimed at making sure that all internet users have equal access to content. Advocates of that idea say it's in jeopardy, though. President Obama is hoping that the same rules that were created for the telephone industry some 80 years ago will now help keep the internet open and free. American telecommunication regulators have been trying for months to create rules to manage online traffic. Critics say that without the right guidelines, web companies and customers would be at the mercy of profit-driven internet service providers. Well, think of the internet as a highway with the express toll roads and regular lanes. If a driver wants to move faster without interruptions, well, he probably has to pay the extra fee. Now, Netflix is one of the companies calling for the internet to be regulated like utility firms. Rules would likely protect the internet-based business from being charged at higher rates. Opponents include major internet providers such as AT&T. They also say additional regulation could discourage them from carrying out investment and expansion plans. Now, even though the U.S. is home to some of the world's biggest tech companies, it doesn't hold the title of the world's fastest internet. In fact, it doesn't even crack the top 10. So let's take a look at which areas of the world you want to be logged on to. Israel comes in at number 5. Then there's Singapore, which has picked up significant speed over the past year or two, at number 3. And then there's Japan, thanks to broad fiber optic networks there. And South Korea, the home of course, Samsung, takes the number 2 spot. And number 1 is the Special Administrative Region of Hong Kong. Evan Engstrom, Policy Director of the Engine Research Foundation, joins me right here in the studio. You're based out there in San Francisco. Welcome to Washington, D.C. So Obama wants the internet to be a utility. Why and how would that help?
I would stop you there and say it's not that the president wants the internet to be a utility. What we're talking about is the authority that the government has to issue rules that we had in place before but got struck down by a court. So the rules we want in place aren't necessarily the wide range of utility rules that might apply to different services, but narrowly focused principles that prevent internet service providers from discriminating against particular traffic.
So, I mean, in principle, to say that we all want to have similar internet speeds or not be discriminated against as to which content we can have, it seems like it's something that most people would generally agree on. Who's opposed? The big companies, and I guess the answer to the question is why?
Pretty clearly, the people that are opposed are the carriers themselves, because they can make money off of it, quite frankly. They have a very strong position with respect to individual consumers. You have one option, basically, to log on to the internet. You have one pipe come into your house. Any company that wants to access you that pipe has to go through the ISP. This gives them tremendous monopoly power, and they want to be able to use that power to charge companies money to get to you.
One of the arguments I heard from these companies that have the pipe into the house, so to speak, they paid for the pipe. They dug the pipe, they put in the pipe, they invested all this money, not yesterday, but we're talking years ago, and their argument is, we paid for that infrastructure, why should we now give that up? Your answer?
We regulate monopolies because monopolies have anti-competitive intrinsic characteristics. They built a lot of these pipes in a time when you couldn't discriminate. It was impossible to do these things. So it's hard to say that they invested in these utilities or in these pipes in order to recoup some investment going on later through paid prioritization. It just doesn't make sense. And it's just more important that we keep this open to have the internet ecosystem grow, which basically encourages people to buy more broadband. It's what the FCC calls the virtuous cycle of innovation.
I mean, I guess as a consumer, you know, 2 things we want: faster speeds, lower cost. Those 2 things, right? So how might that help that further?
You will have better speeds and lower costs with competition. That's what it takes. The US does not have great competition. But I would keep in mind that whenever you're talking about net neutrality versus competition, they're similar but different things. Even if you have 10 choices of internet service provider, you're only going to use one. So they're always going to have a monopoly power over access to you. But to get better speeds and to get lower costs, we need competition.
Well, one of the biggest providers in the United States is Comcast, and we were talking earlier before this segment that they are one of the most hated companies in the United States. And I don't think it's because of the internet, but I think there's something there that people or consumers, they want to have choice. And there's a sense that they have to use the Comcast. I mean, they're stuck. I mean, we call it cutting the cord. They don't have any other competition. Is there stuff out there right now that potentially could be competition, whether it's 4G on the telecom side or anything else?
Yeah, right now, when we're talking about high speeds, truly high speeds, 25 megabits or higher, 50 megabits or higher. Wireless isn't there yet. There are ways that we can get fiber. That would be great. You see it in other countries where they have 1,000 megabit speeds. It's hard. It's hard to get there. Municipalities are a good example of entities that are trying to fix this problem. So
we ran a thing earlier, you saw that, about the fastest internets in the world, right?
Yeah.
So why is America so far behind on this?
It's competition. Some countries that you mentioned have what are known as sort of open access rules, where one company owns the pipe, a variety of different ISPs provide the service. In the US, the company that owns the pipe is the company that provides the service. So there's no competition. I think it's something like 75% of Americans have one choice of provider if you want to get speeds of 25 megabits or higher.
So if Obama gets his way, or gets to push this through a little further on the Telecommunications Act, how would that promote ultimately competition?
Net neutrality isn't directly going to increase the number of ISPs you have access to. It's just going to make those ISPs that have monopoly power less prone to abuse that power.
But we want to hold them accountable. If they, I mean, has there been evidence they've abused the power?
It's happened in the past. Famously, in 2008, Comcast throttled a particular internet service. And part of the reason we haven't had a ton of instances of abuse is because we've pretty much always had net neutrality principles in place. And that's been a good reason why the internet ecosystem in America has grown so exponentially.
I mean, this is essentially to prevent discrimination. So if I own the pipe, I can't say, well, you can read the content and Ron can't, for example. I mean, we want to make it as fair so both parties or all the parties have equal access to that content. That said, are we going to see more and more big companies? Netflix, for example, has already spoken. Other big companies, because ultimately they're the ones that are going to sway Congress, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing some large companies come out in support of this, but there's been a really strong movement amongst startups, which are the people who are most likely to suffer harm from these policies. They're small. The average startup raises something like $80,000. They can't afford to fight with ISPs over priority deals. Frankly, I think the president's statement is the best sort of event we've had so far in pushing net neutrality forward, and I think it's leading in the right direction. We're going to get strong rules out of it.
It's a fascinating topic. Hopefully something works out that so at least consumers get higher speeds and lower costs. Evan, good to have you here in Washington. Thank you very much.